So my name is Charles Chun Peng, and I am the first begotten son of two South Korean immigrants. My father Iksu Peng and my mother Ilsoon Peng. Not quite the most attractive names, but names nonetheless. Now, my father and mother, as I said, directly immigrated to the United States from South Korea. Um, my father was just 19 years old, fresh out of high school, and needless to say, he was from a very low class family, while my mother was practically royalty. I'm told that my grandfather on my mother's side was the fertilizer king of South Korea during the time, and my grandmother, his wife, was a you know realtor, like well-known realtor, and so just day and night, low class, upper class, and the thing about South Korean culture, even to this day, is that matchmakers are very prevalent. And I'm not talking like dating apps, I'm talking like people who, know people and matchmake, couples. Now, it was a mutual friend who, thank God, had introduced my mother to my father, who at the time was, and it still is, 4 years younger than my mother. Now, it is known that my mother was under the impression that he was at least the same age, if not older. At least that's how my mom, I asked him, like, so he just straight lied to you? My dad was just like, I didn't tell her how old I was. She just assumed I was much older than I was because I was, whatever. But, they met, they went on their first date where, they got a bowl of jjajangmyeon, which is a traditional Korean dish, a noodle dish, with a black bean sauce. Very delicious. If you know of a Korean place, ask them if they have any jjajangmyeon. But the cute story here is that my father was, again, like, so poor and like so broke that he only had enough money to pay for one bowl. And so at the date, he orders just one bowl, and my mom says, like, I was like, well, aren't you going to eat? And my father just said, oh, no, I ate earlier and I'm still full, so you can have it. And this is where my father was just like, I was expecting that your mother would, like, at least share some with me, but she just was sitting there eating this whole bowl of jjajangmyeon in front of me, while I'm, like, sitting here starving, just like, oh, I was just like, wow. It's a unique experience, at least for me, to, like, listen to both my parents, like, tell the story of their courtship, like, directly to me. I don't know if you guys have the opportunity to, have your parents do the same for you. uh, Let alone maybe you're not even ready for that story. But, you know, it's not all that bad from what I've experienced. But back to the story, it was love at first sight, from my father. Um, and, my mother as well. I asked my mother, like, how long it took, dad to propose to her, after, they like went on this date. And she told me 3 months. And I was just like, that's crazy because at that time, at this time, I'm like in my late 20s hearing this story, but hearing that, like, I've always had like this 3 month like period where it's just like every girl that I was just like head over heels in love with, it happened around like a 3 month, maybe even like a 3 week period. But like at like this 3 month, I was just like, I'm gonna marry this girl. So like that totally just resonated with me. And the trippy part to me is that my parents, look at me. I'm like the rebellious one. I'm like the, they tell me like, like they don't understand like how I can just like disobey, my parents like that. Like, I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, first of all, my mother, again, coming from like this high class, like almost royalty family, had plenty of suitors coming her way, not only from, my grandparents, but, she had two older sisters, like she had a lot of offers. While my dad, he won't admit it, but I'm sure his pick of the litter was not quite as bountiful, I guess would be the word. But nonetheless, my father, told my mother that he would like to get her parents' blessing um, to marry their youngest daughter. And when my grandparents finally met my father for the first time, they were just like, who is this guy? And like, what family are you from? Like just totally looking down on him. And, when he asked for their blessing to, have their daughter's hand in marriage, like he just told me, they were like, no, you are nowhere near good enough for our daughter. So, like, we appreciate you asking, but that's never going to happen. And this, as any man in this situation would be devastated, even to the extent where my father knew that this was going to be the outcome. He told my mother, like, look, I knew that everything they told me was exactly what they were going to say. And I agree. If I stay in South Korea, I will never be able to get out of this poverty class that I was born into. That's just how South Korea is, you know, like, and luckily my father had, you know, like 7 older sisters, and one of them, my Aunt Marie, had met a United States Marine, my Uncle Ray, who was stationed in South Korea, and they got married. And this at the time allowed, you know, my aunt and her direct family, which included my father and, you know, all their siblings and, you know, like a visa to come to the land of opportunity, the land of dreams, you know, where my father knew that a man who works hard and, you know, is going to have a better chance of becoming successful than staying in South Korea. You know, I'm just kind of summing up this story, but I hope you kind of get the gist of just like the emotion that was like weighing down at this moment where my father, you know, is just like, look, I have a ticket to America, and if you still would marry me, you know, like he promised my mother that in this land of opportunity, he's going to do everything and anything he can to make sure that he has a house ready for her, you know, a car, a stable life, the life that he knows, she knows, my grandparents know that she deserves, you know? And that was the promise. Just, if you marry me, I promise you I will do this. And when I have all this ready for you, I will send for you. And my mother was just like, okay, I will marry you. And they secretly got married. I have the wedding picture. And, you know, it was a crazy coincidence because the woman who had, you know, done my mother's hair and my father's hair when they were getting married like 40 plus years ago in South Korea is now in Colorado and cutting hair, and, you know, they reconnected. And so now she's cutting my hair. So she looks at me and she's just like amazed, you know, at just like time. But again, I asked my mother just like, you just said yes, you know, and you just like went against everything grandma, you know, like, what did you tell grandma and grandpa? And she was like, I didn't tell them anything. They didn't know I was married. And I was like, and you don't know where I get my rebellious side from, Mom? I don't think you know yourself or me, like, at all, you know, like, but now this is where the two kind of split. And I asked my mother, okay, so how long did it take Dad to come for you? And she told me 4 years, you know, and I was just like, 4 years? You know, and she told me, yeah, you know, I didn't get a phone call. I didn't get a letter. I had no idea if he was dead or alive at this point. But yeah, 4 years, she just kept waiting for something and believing, you know, like I was just like, why did you pick him? Out of all the people you could have picked, why Dad? And she just told me, out of all the men that I've met who promised me the world and beyond, your father was the only one who made me believe he would fulfill those promises. And I was just like, wow, that was deep. You know? And so, yeah, my mother's just waiting along, like casually just going on dates, you know, like to, you know, save face. But on the flip side, my father here, 19 years old, like, like $20 in his pocket in Florida doing dishes, you know, just scrimping by, finds out that there's, you know, a decent size, you know, Korean community living in Colorado. And so he made his way down, or I guess up, to Colorado, where he got a job at a restaurant called Gashio as a dishwasher, and worked as a janitor. You know, he was doing all these jobs, and even just to save all the money that he was making from all these jobs, he chose to sleep on the streets. You know, like he could have, you know, paid for a motel or, you know, rented an apartment, but he, in his mind, is the type of person who just like says like, look, if I do that, if I work these 3 jobs and I have to pay rent, then I'm slowing myself from getting to my goal of getting your mother to this country. And so he made the sacrifice to save that money, you know, and sleep on the streets. Granted, if it was cold, then yeah, he would get a room. But, you know, like if he could, then he would sleep on the streets and, you know, save that extra money just to get him that much closer. That's the kind of sacrifice that my father made out of love for my mother, you know, and like it was by chance that a fellow South Korean like drove by and like saw, you know, this Asian man like sleeping, you know, on outside in Colorado, and she stopped and she asked him like, "Hey, are you Korean?" And he was like, "Yeah." And she was just like, "What are you doing here? Do you need a place to stay?" And, you know, my father's just like, "Oh, no, it's okay. You know, like I'm just trying to save money." And luckily she was just like, "Look, come stay with me," you know, like, and she took him in, you know. And this is when, you know, somebody asked me like, "How come you don't see any Asian homeless people?" And I was like, "You know, I don't know." And I asked my father, and he was like, "Because when Asian people see another Asian person like panhandling or sleeping on the street, we try to help them, you know, like that's our people, you know, like." And I was just like, well, that's admirable, but you know, like, how does that help like our current homeless situation? Which I guess if as Americans we look at all the people we see on the streets as our fellow Americans and say, look, I'm gonna look at one and see if there's a little bit of light left in that and try to harness that light and let that light blossom, you know, like and which is what this woman did for my father. And my father to this day says he regrets not remembering her name, which I'm just like, how could you not remember this woman's name, you know, like. And so I like just pray and thank, you know, God for just providing this woman in my father's life and just having that kind of impact. Now, fast forward 4 years, you know, he's started this like janitorial company after meeting, you know, his business partner of now, you know, 40 plus years, Sherwood Elkine, this, you know, very suave Hebrew man who was, you know, cleaning like buildings at his college campus to pay for college. And, you know, during final exams, he needed somebody to take over, and he had my father do it. You know, my father met him through his wife, who was teaching my father English at the college, you know. So it was just like this whole like godly plan in my eyes, in my view, of just like how everything came to be for me, you know. And so with all that, my mother comes to this country, you know, like finally she gets this like letter in the mail and a ticket to America. You know, I was just like, so what did you say to grandma? Grandma, she's like, I just told her, hey, I got something I have to tell you. You know, like I've been married this whole time to that guy that you guys told me not to get married to, and he just sent me a plane ticket to America, and I'm gonna go. See ya. You know, that's like, Mom. And so she comes to America, and you know, a couple years later, um, I'm born. So there's part one. Stay tuned for stay tuned for part two.